Resident Evil Requiem is the culmination of everything Capcom has learned over years of developing terrifying bio-experimental horror games, and hopefully this video will help all you survivors out there be prepared for the next biohazard. If you're like me, you thought about playing all the mainline numbered entries, but then quickly found out that would be a dauntingly monumental task. Of course, if you are a Resident Evil veteran, you can probably speedrun through all the games and it would be actually doable before Requiem shambles out of Capcom's doors and onto store shelves. So that said, this video is made more for the rookies and the casual fans who might need a refresher or have only played a game or two in the series. However, if you are a veteran of the series, please feel free to stick around, watch the video, and make your own suggestions down in the comments below. Now, as a new player, especially going in without any guides, your playthrough times can vary greatly. On average, it will take a new player 6 to 10 hours for the shorter games like Resident Evil HD and Resident Evil 2 Remake, and 16 to 20 hours for longer games like Resident Evil 4 Remake and Resident Evil 6. And those numbers are being generous. So even if we assume you are a god gamer and use the generous lower playthrough averages I just mentioned, you're staring down the Hydra barrels of roughly 100 to 150 hours of anus-puckering survival action horror. And that's just the 8 mainline games using the more modern and accessible remakes. The 100 to 150 hours doesn't include the original classic releases or any spin-offs like the Revelation series. And at the time of writing this script, Resident Evil 9 Requiem is 76 days away from release. So if you started today, you would have to play about 2 to 4 hours every day, maybe more until release day. Which may sound doable to some of you, but again, that's assuming you're a god and are somehow seeing this video before I've even finished it. By the time you're actually seeing this, you will have less than 76 days before RE9 drops like a rotting corpse onto our systems. Not to mention the fact that you can double or even triple those generous lowball times if you want to see and do as much as possible in each game. Because just about every Resident Evil game is packed with either secrets, multiple playable characters, additional modes, DLC, New Game Plus options, and then some. So with all that in mind, a full mainline series playthrough before Resident Evil 9's February 27th release is unrealistic for those who aren't veterans of the series. Especially those of us who have to shuffle like zombies to our 9-to-5s every day. So what can we do? What games in the series can and should you play? What games in the series can realistically be completed in that time frame without feeling rushed or like you have a second job? Are you hoping to have time to do extra content or multiple playthroughs of certain games? Well, after spending way too much time listing the pros and cons of the many Resident Evil games and how they may relate to Requiem in my free time, I believe I have found a solution. You should play all the games that feature Leon S. Kennedy, the S stands for survives everything, and Alyssa no middle name Ashcroft. Now, this is admittedly an obvious conclusion in hindsight, as Alyssa's daughter Grace and Leon are the dual protagonists of Resident Evil Requiem. But this answer isn't as straightforward as you may think, nor is it the best answer for everyone, which comes down to a variety of reasons we will get into. Starting with the man, the myth, the legend, Leon Super Cop Kennedy and his games. If you're looking to go all the way back to the 1998 original Resident Evil 2, the port can be purchased on PC through Good Old Games and digitally on the PlayStation Store. Unfortunately, to my knowledge, there is no port for classic RE2 on Xbox or Nintendo systems. I personally recommend looking into emulation on PC if you have your Undead Heart set on the OG experience. You can check out Retro Renew and similar channels on YouTube for how to best get started with emulation. I'll have Retro Renew's channel linked in the description. The biggest pro of the original RE2 is your A and B playthroughs for Leon will have actual differences ranging from enemies, bosses, items, and even some story elements. You also just become more cultured having played it. The biggest downside being that it's old and may be a rough ride for those who have never played it or any PS1 games before. The fixed camera angles and tank controls can be hard to get used to for many. I will admit to my own shame that I've tried in the distant and not so distant past to play the OG Resident Evil trilogy, but never completed any runs despite my obsession with the series. It was too scary for me back in 1998 when I was a kid, and now I just can't deal with the older game design despite wanting and trying to. If your situation is like mine, or you're a zoomer who doesn't know what a PS1 or tank controls even are, that leaves the RE2 Remake, which is the most accessible and modern version. It's available on pretty much every platform, even the Switch, and it's an amazing game in its own right. This will be the best option for most of you watching to see what Leon was up to as a rookie cop during the Raccoon City outbreak.
Be prepared, Leon.
Next in Leon timeline is the fan favorite Resident Evil 4. This is where we see just how badass Leon has become since his rookie cop days. RE4 will give you an idea of what peak Leon is capable of. Both the original RE4 and the remake are widely available on all platforms, and I recommend playing them both if you can find the time. The original RE4's gameplay should be familiar enough for any modern Zoomer gamer, as it kind of started the whole third-person action shooter trend. And as the trendsetter, just about any third-person shooter game you can think of from the last 20 years was influenced by what was done in RE4 back in 2005. The only real barrier for some will be getting used to the fact that you can't move while aiming or shooting. The remake has more modern gameplay, visuals, and adds in some cool mechanics that I won't get into here, as you should discover them for yourself. The RE4 remake will be more appealing to the graphics snobs out there, as the game is stunningly grotesque thanks to the RE engine. This is the same engine used in the RE2 and 3 remakes, as well as in RE7, Village, and the upcoming Requiem. The last stop on Leon's gaming timeline is one of the most divisive entries in the series, Resident Evil 6. It was widely hated for a long time, but over the years has found its fans. The game is available on just about every platform and easy to get your rotting hands on. You have 4 playable campaigns in this entry, but the only one we care about for our purposes is Leon's. I won't be spoiling the other available character campaigns here, that way you can discover them for yourself. The story is the same, but told from multiple perspectives, with each character's campaign revealing more about what is going on. That said, you will get a full story just playing Leon's campaign, but know that his story is just one piece of a much larger, if a bit rotten pizza. This is the last time we see Leon, and honestly most of the main cast, for some time, as Resident Evil 6 did not review or sell well at release. However, many considered Leon's campaign to be the best among the offerings, and I think it's still worth checking out, even if you don't plan on playing through the others. And as I mentioned before, time has been kind to RE6, and I've seen a lot of people who were initially very hard on the game come around to liking what it has to offer. That brings us to Alyssa Ashcroft, Grace Ashcroft's mother, who fortunately only appears in 2 games, Resident Evil Outbreak and Outbreak File Number 2, or just Outbreak 2 if you prefer. Unfortunately for Resident Evil fans though, these games are only available on their original platform, the PlayStation 2, which means you will need a working PS2 and copies of both Outbreak and Outbreak 2. Or you can use emulation if you're on PC. Sorry modern console players. Again, for those willing to try their necrotic hand at emulation, I have provided whatever helpful links I can for setting up a PS2 and PS1 emulator in the description. Just remember that even after setting up the emulator, whether for the Outbreak games or the OG Resident Evil 2, you will need to obtain an ISO file of said games. If you already own the game disc, you can look up how to file dump the ISOs from the disc onto your PC. Otherwise, you will need to sail the high seas of the internet to get what you need. I know this news sucks, as these are the only games Alyssa Ashcroft appears in, but there is an upside, because you now have time to fit in some other great RE titles into your playthrough. Besides, you can just go watch Sphere Hunter or Avalanche reviews go through those games, it'll be fine. So for those unable or unwilling to play the Outbreak games, then I would recommend playing Resident Evil 7 and Village, which are the 2 most recent games in the timeline. They don't follow Leon or any members of the Ashcroft family, but instead follow Ethan on his familial life's journey. They are both worth playing before Requiem, as they introduced the first-person perspective into the series and revitalized the franchise, which had been languishing in its own rot since 2012. RE7 is a return to heart-pounding true survival horror with enough action and combat for those who want it to stay engaged, with RE Village being a sort of homage to Resident Evil 4 and incorporates more action to the formula that was established in the prior entry. I recommend both main games and some of the DLCs if you want the full Ethan saga and up-to-date info on the state of the world in Resident Evil before Requiem comes out. Speaking of Requiem, RE9 will have first and third-person gameplay perspectives, combining elements from all the games we've discussed so far and giving yet another good reason to include RE7 and RE8 in your pre-Requiem playthrough. Now that we've gone through all the games I recommend you play before RE9, there is only one thing left to do. and that's check our inventory and see what different herb combos we can make. I've put together a few different playthrough methods using the games we've discussed that should give everyone a reasonable amount of Resident Evil to play without it becoming a second job or feeling like you need to rush through each game.
There you are.
The first option is the modern zoomer, which consists of the following games: RE2 Remake, RE4 Remake, RE6 Leon's Campaign, RE7, and RE8 Village. This is probably the best and definitely the most accessible option for the majority of players out there, especially those who only have access to modern consoles. This playthrough clocks in at 49 to 72 hours of butt-cheek tensing horror, the only con being you won't get to see Alyssa Ashcroft's story. But again, you can always just watch a Resident Evil Outbreak playthrough or lore video to learn about her and what she got up to both in and out of Raccoon City. And as an avid consumer of Resident Evil lore videos myself, you can trust me when I tell you the number of lore videos out there could rival even the Undead Horde. The second option is the Super Cop, which consists of RE2, RE2R, RE4, RE4R, RE6 Leon's Campaign, RE7, and RE8 Village. This method is not for the faint of heart, clocking in at 70 to 102 hours of both old school and modern toe-curling horror. I advise you attempt this at your own risk, as I will not be held responsible for any tragedies that may befall you. The third option is Super Cop and the Graceful Reporter, which consists of RE2, RE2 Remake, RE4, RE4 Remake, RE6 Leon's Campaign, RE Outbreak, RE Outbreak 2, RE7, and RE8 Village. This is the longest option, clocking in at 80 to 118 hours, not including the time it takes to set up any emulators, which can be a process in and of itself, though nowadays it's really not that bad. But with emulator setup in mind, for this option I created a B-side playthrough. This is for those of you with less time or willingness to play older games in the series, or those who just don't want to mess around with emulation or become a swashbuckling digital pirate. The B-side consists of RE2 or RE2 Remake, RE4 or RE4 Remake, RE6 Leon's Campaign, RE7, and RE8 Village. This option clocks in at 45 to 65 hours if you decide to go with the OG RE2 and RE4, but if you go with the remakes for your playthrough, it will clock in at 49 to 72 hours. Option A might be doable for some of you, but including the original versions of RE2 and RE4 in addition to the remakes of both those games adds substantially to your total playtime. And opting for RE7 and RE8 Village over Outbreak and Outbreak 2 means you don't have to sink time into emulator setup or risk the FBI kicking your door in. Now, depending on which versions of RE2 and RE4 you decide to complete will affect your playthrough time as well, as choosing to go with the remakes will typically make for a longer playthrough, as the remakes just tend to be longer in general. However, if you've never played an older PS1 game, you may find the inverse to be true for you. I would also suggest if you play a version of one game that you do the same for the other, just for consistency. So if you choose RE2 Remake, then play RE4 Remake and do the same for the OG releases. But I'm not your dad, so you do you. I know option A can seem ridiculous, but I really do think there is merit in playing the classic and remake versions back to back, as this will give you a new appreciation for the series, the survival horror genre, and for gaming as a whole. Even if you don't plan to beat the classic versions, I encourage you to at least play them for a while if you have the means to do so. Again, all the playthrough times used to calculate this were pulled from a mix of my personal experiences, playthroughs online, and websites like howlongtobeat.com. So needless to say, this isn't an exact science, but it should at least give you an idea of what you're in for. My goal was to have the highest estimated playtime for each playthrough be around 100 to 120 hours, which is still a lot, don't get me wrong, but it's way less time than it would to beat all these games you see here, and you'll still get an idea of what's going on in the world of Resident Evil before Requiem comes out. Also, feel free to customize any of these methods however you want, adding or removing games as you see fit. And remember, there is no shame in following a guide to speed things up and make sure you can do everything you want to in each game. But no matter what you end up doing, be sure to let me know down in the comments what your playthrough ends up mutating into. Also, remember to check the description for all the helpful links I mentioned earlier. Oh, and here's every RE game ever in timeline order if you're interested in that. I'll try to remember to include a timeline ordered list of the games that were specifically discussed in this video down in the description, but if it's not there, it's because I'm too busy fighting off the undead myself as I'm going through my own personal mutated playthrough. So, if you're interested in watching a grown man who scares way too easily play a bunch of survival horror games back to back, then hit the subscribe button below and go follow me over on Twitch, which will be linked in the pinned comment. I'll be streaming my progress over there and here on YouTube before the February 27th release of RE9. That brings us to the end of the video, so would you kindly like the video if you liked the video, dislike it if you didn't, and subscribe either way. Also share this video with that one friend you've been trying to get into Resident Evil for years because you know damn well they'll love it, but they keep telling you, no, there are too many games to get into it now. Anyways, doing all that YouTube jazz helps me out tremendously and is greatly appreciated, but regardless of any of that, thank you so much for watching until the end, and as always, have a cool-a-rooney day.
Kudos.